Hello everybody, this is part 2 of our 2 videos on comparative social work, 2 shorter videos. What I want to do in this particular video is ask some more questions, again, some of which you're going to take with you to our next session when I next see you online. And I'm also giving you links to other videos to watch as well. The theme in each case is going to be comparing social work in different countries. Why is it different? And how can we understand these differences? So my next big question, this is really one that you've probably been asking yourselves already. Why is social work different? Why can it be different when we see it in other countries? It really is different everywhere. You really can spot this. Sometimes it's only a little bit different. Neighbouring countries often have very similar social work professions, but sometimes it's very, very different. And the 2 countries I know best, Germany and Britain, illustrate this nicely. There's so many big fundamental differences in social work practice in Germany compared to the UK. So why is social work different? Scratch your heads. If you can, discuss this with your mixed nationality group members. Think of possible reasons which explain or partially explain social work's diversity. Why is social work different? Come up with as many points as you can, and the more you scratch your heads, the more different points you should be able to come up with. You may well have 6 or 7 or 8 or 9 different bullet points. As an example of what I want from you, a nice starting point might be social work is different in different countries because each country has its own social work law. Okay, so the laws that regulate social work are different, therefore the social works are different, so to say. So that's a nice idea just to kick off your list. Think about that and add points to that list. I want to move on. I'm not going to answer that question here in this video. Take your list with you, hold on to it. We can exchange those ideas. You can tell me some of the points you've come up with in our meeting together. I want to move on and talk about a system for thinking about differences in one particular part of social work, child welfare social work. I want to tell you about Gilbert and colleagues' ideas. So what they did was a 3-way comparison of child protection systems. They looked at the child welfare in a small group of countries and they said, okay, can we categorize this system on account of its features? You know, what commonalities do we have? What differences do we have? They came up with a 3-way categorization system. They reckoned that most of the systems they were looking at could fit into one of these 3 separate categories. And their first category is countries with a clear child protection focus. In other words, there's a bunch of countries, and if you look at their child welfare system, it often highlights reactive work for individual children responding to abuse or neglect, or sometimes for possibility of abuse and neglect, which we're aware is maybe out there. So looking at families from a protection perspective. Okay, now if you have this protection thought or this protection perspective, you might be asking yourself, you know, is the child okay in the family? Do we have to consider a removal here? So those kind of questions are out there in such countries' systems. So that's one kind of country, one kind of approach. And obviously in each country there'll be different approaches to doing child welfare, but the point is in some countries this protective focus seems to dominate. You know, it happens more than the other kinds of work you can do with the family. What would a contrast with that be? Maybe best understood using Gilbert and colleagues' second category here. They note that some countries have a family services focus. Now you can also talk about that as a family support focus. These countries have lots of preventative work. There's a lot of prevention. There's a lot of work done to strengthen families. You might well guess these countries tend to have more child welfare work because all of this prevention work is something that costs a lot of money to actually do. This is, you know, this is a big impact, providing lots of preventative services. Interestingly, even if these family services countries have a child protection case, they might look at it as an extension of their normal family services work. In other words, even in the child protection case, the work of the parents is quite cooperative and is shaped a little bit like a family support service. Voluntary interventions rather than coercion, rather than forced interventions. So this, for Gilbert and colleagues, is a separate category. Their third category overlaps a little bit with the second because it's common in countries of quite a generous family services approach anyway. But they note some countries have a family services approach with the additional feature of mandatory reporting in the case of suspected child abuse. The point is, these countries are often a bit faster to actually look at child abuse as a problem and to respond to it with interventions. And an explanation of this is that this system is common in countries which really value children's rights particularly highly. So countries which have an extreme status for child-centered services often have this approach. Now, Gilbert and colleagues believe that systems can be categorized into one of these three. You know, if I give you a country, you can look at its system, you can look at its laws, you can look at its arrangements, and you'll tend to come to the conclusion that it kind of fits into case 1 or case 2 or case 3. So an interesting idea, this three-way comparison, it kind of echoes the Esping-Anderson approach to thinking about welfare states. You know, the idea of saying each one of our systems must be able to slot into one of these three types. You know, we've got 3 regimes of child protection, so to say here. So it's a curious idea, but you really can apply it and, you know, grab a country, look at their legislation, look at their arrangements and see if you can fit it in. Maybe it's nice to do that with examples from a particular country. Think about your own country. Have you any idea which your system matches? Which type here, which one of Gilbert's 3 categories does your own child welfare system best fit into? Some of you might know that immediately without even thinking much. Others, you may have to think about it a little bit to orientate yourself, or even you might have to check the law in your country to work out which of those points applies. It's really interesting thinking about this from the perspective of England and Wales, one of the systems that I know best. And I've got some fascinating videos for you on UK child welfare. And they relate to the case of a toddler who died. In 2007, a toddler who had social services contact died, Peter Connolly, known as Baby P at the time. Now, the death was a result of very serious child abuse. And I've got 2 clips on this. The first is a clip from the House of Commons on a day when a report was published and the whole case was being debated in Parliament. My second clip takes a news report from the BBC around exactly the same time. So the journalists are looking at the case, looking at what happened, trying to reconstruct how the case was being seen at that particular time. They're both dated. This is going back to around 2008. So my news clips come from around 2008. So something like a decade and a half ago, but still utterly descriptive of UK social work. This really is a view of how social work is seen in the UK. So I think these news clips get you quite close to getting a feeling of UK social work. Questions on these clips: how do you find them? What are your first impressions? It's kind of interesting if you're non-British watching these clips because you're seeing a foreign reaction to a child welfare case. If you are British, of course, it's also fascinating to see how we are. You know, this is our way of dealing with child protection concerns. So first impressions watching the clips. How would a case like this be treated and discussed differently in your country if you're not British? You know, so if you're Swedish, if you're Finnish, if you're Italian, how would we look at child protection? Could this case be a case from our own country, or would it be different where we are? Finally, can you guess what type Britain has in Gilbert et al.'s typology? So when Gilbert and colleagues talk about these 3 different systems, the child protection dominated system, the family support, family services dominated system, the mandatory reporting system, which one does it best slot into? Which one of those really fits the case of Britain best? Think about that. I'm going to come to a close here, But again, I'm thoroughly looking forward to our next online session, and do find time to watch those 2 other clips. They're quite short and they're really, really interesting, I promise. Thanks for listening, everybody. See you soon.